technology industry, at some point there happens so-called standard wars. There are several players who develop their own standards and they create some sort of competitive advantage. But they also limit new player entrants in the market and development of new innovations. And telecommunication industry is no different. But over here also people are working on open standards which would enable other players to join the market and work on innovation. And that's the topic for our next panel, Open RAN Technological Challenges and Opportunities, moderated by Marios Nicolaou, Senior Consultant at Coleago. Over to you, Marios.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to our physical and our digital audience and to our panelists. So welcome to Riga, welcome to this discussion. Here we're going to focus about Open RAN. It appeared several years ago with lots of promise, but from the beginning we knew that it was going to be a complex and technological thing to achieve. Essentially we want to make networks, radio networks and radio access networks as plug and play as possible, just like as you plug your Wi-Fi router and it miraculously just works. We have with us a distinguished set of panelists from all over the world, also online. We have two more panelists. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to explore where we are now, the current state of the O-RAN industry, how it's developing, and then we're going to move another round towards where is the future going. So welcome to our panel once again. Christian, where are we? You are hands-on testing things all over the world. Very few people have probably so much lab experience as you do in the situation. Please tell us more a little bit about yourself, your company, and where we are.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Christian Müller. I'm working for Rohde & Schwarz since a few decades. So I started in this environment already with 2G. And the focus on our side, we are a test and measurement company, and the focus is on testing with some focus on the radio interface. And yeah, Open RAN is quite an interesting story for us as well, and an interesting challenge. So this plug and play, as it was announced with a lot of marketing years ago, was always an issue where I said, oh, let's see how it is working. Yeah? And from a test and measurement perspective, to get the performance is an issue, to get the interoperability is an issue. But on the other side, it brings a lot of challenges for the small and medium enterprises to bring in innovations and so on. So I see a mix here in this environment. Yeah? And when we see now the first networks coming along, they are mainly in this area of enterprises and small networks. And I see pretty good opportunities coming in this environment, but it's a way. So it's not ready today, and I'm pretty much convinced it will be a technology we can work on, and which brings quite some good additional insights in. So from a test and measurement, some experience where we are today, I would say I've been in a harbor environment for autonomous equipment, for crane control. We've been in a test center for automotive, for autonomous driving on trucks. So that has been on an Open RAN technology. I would say from a performance point of view in such a small environment, it was really good. So we achieved latencies in a range of around 12 to 15 milliseconds. We achieved uploads in a range of 300 megabits, 350 megabit, and downloads in a range of 1 gigabit. So it is working, but still there is challenges in terms of, like in Germany, we have private networks with allocated frequency bands, which are very close to the public band. So we have challenges in terms of synchronization to the Deutsche Telekom network, for instance, or if we are in a research environment, we have challenges that certain base stations are on air, but maybe not synchronized. And these are situations which are causing interference. And yeah, that's one of our challenges, to find it in terms of troubleshooting, deployment, in terms of performance tuning. So I would say at the moment, a very good future, and we have a good playground for
Wonderful.
further research.
Thank you very much. Let's go now online. We have great pleasure to have with us an actual operator, BT. Richard, thanks a lot for accepting our last-minute invitation. Please, what do you see from the eyes of an operator? What is your experience? I'm sure you've played a lot with the technology. What can you tell us? Give us your insights, please.
Thanks for inviting me, Marius. And apologies to everyone that I couldn't be there in person. As he said, I was involved quite last minute, but I would have loved to have been there. So if there are any questions for me afterwards, I'm happy to take some emails afterwards. But from an operator perspective, one of the key things that we're trying to address with the future next generation rollouts is making sure that we have a resilient supply chain. And what we have seen over recent years is the number of vendors has just declined. So the ecosystem is not very resilient, and the knock-on effect to that lack of competition is also a lack of innovation. So when we talk about next generation rollout, we want to be able to offer new capabilities for our customers, and we're not going to see that as the innovation declines. So that was the main driver behind Open RAN, and I think a lot of people were talking about a TCO reduction. That might happen as a result of competition, but that's not the primary reason for Open RAN. And it's also, Open RAN as an architecture is also a way of modernizing the way we roll out networks because of the virtualization aspect. So certainly we want to add features more quickly, add new services and capabilities more quickly. And we can only do that in a virtualized environment. We can't wait for new hardware to be tested and then deployed before we can offer variations of a service. So the virtualization aspect is a key part of Open RAN that really offers new opportunities to an operator. One of the biggest challenges to the industry is this lack of competition, and that's not just about competition between vendors. That's also competition between operators. If we don't have much choice of what we can deploy, it's very hard for operators to differentiate from one another. And this is one of the key areas where I think Open RAN can genuinely make us outperform legacy architectures, in that we have this centralized component, the RAN intelligent controller, which really does enable operators to differentiate from one another. We can add features and capabilities from a range of third parties that can allow us to offer a completely different suite of services from our competitors. And so that seems to be one of the most exciting areas, I think. In terms of making all this happen, the problem is interoperability. And so it's been key for us to work with global industry organizations. So NGMN and TIP in particular have been very good at driving this forwards. And then we need standardization. So 3GPP and O-RAN Alliance have been critical there. But I think Open RAN at the moment, the worst thing I could say about Open RAN is people want it to be a success instantly, and it is succeeding in areas, and it's developing very quickly. But we're not at that point where we can sit back and relax. There's still a huge amount of work to be done, and as we deploy more and more Open RAN, we're going to see interoperability challenges overcome. But at this moment, I think interoperability to enable a genuine multi-vendor deployment is still probably the biggest area that we need to focus on.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for those for the insights. Let's now turn to Timo. We have an open software company working on Open RAN. That's essentially the dream of all industries. What are your insights, Timo?
So first of all, I'm a chief technologist at Red Hat Telecom Media and Entertainment, based in a couple of countries north from here in Finland, and focusing on RAN specifically for the last couple of years. People might ask that why is 100% open source software company involved in RAN? That's a good question, but we are. And why we are is, the reason is that 3GPP initially with their release 15, they specified which people call disaggregated RAN, having radio unit, distributed unit, and centralized unit like a separate entities with eventually good open interfaces between those RAN workloads. And then specifically DU and CU, the other disaggregation model is to separate hardware from the software, and that's where Red Hat plays in. So we provide software platforms, cloud platforms for DU and CU purposes, not on radio unit yet, maybe it happens one of these days, but now on DU and CU. And primarily it's a container platform. We can provide virtualization platform if necessary, but looks like in the Open RAN space it's more like containers, not that much virtualization, but we can do both. And on top of that, we can provide automation tools, open source automation tools, which is very, very important topic when you deploy RAN sites in scale, like hundreds of thousands of RAN sites. It has to be automated. So that's how we play in. And this whole topic of Open RAN and disaggregated RAN, that opened an opportunity for us to chime in. Earlier we had nothing to do with incumbent vendors. People call it classic RAN. They were closed things. We had nothing to do there. Now we do. A couple of, so there's a lot of opportunities. We will talk about that, I'm sure. But a couple of challenges I'd like to point out, which Richard already kind of touched, is the state of the standardization of Open RAN. Now, we have to remember that, or everybody here knows that 3GPP is the standardization authority of mobile network, and whatever they decide and define, that's a mandatory thing to implement by the vendors. Then we have an O-RAN alliance, which is not a de jure standardization, it's de facto. An O-RAN alliance cannot mandate of the usage of their standards. They can, it's a de facto, they can recommend. Of course, service providers like British Telecom, everybody, they can mandate their vendors to implement O-RAN alliance specification, but the organization itself cannot do that. And that kind of creates a little bit, quite a bit of confusion, because if you look at the complete O-RAN alliance compliant RAN, which doesn't exist yet because all the spec work is not done, about half of the interfaces are specified by 3GPP, and another half is specified by O-RAN alliance. So part of the interfaces are mandatory, part of the interfaces are not. They are just recommendation, and I think that's not a good situation to be in. And so that's where we are from standards or specification point of view. The other topic I'd like to raise is the need for system integration, system integrators. So earlier, classic RANs or radio access networks by incumbent vendors, they did take care of everything. You know, you buy Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, RAN, it's a one vendor, they do everything for you or for the service provider. Now it's a collaborative effort, many companies chime in, Red Hat included, and and the incumbent vendors do not take system integration responsibility in that case when there are many vendors in this mix. So there's a specific need for system integrators, and I believe a big opportunity for system integrators. Red Hat is not doing that, unfortunately. I would like to, but we are not built for that. So, you know, the well-known system integrators like Accenture, Capgemini, and Tech Mahindra and all those. And NEC, I'm sure Alla will talk about it. NEC is a equipment provider, but also system integrator. So I personally, I hope a lot what NEC can do.
Well, thank you very much. So system integrators, we have Alla online, and you know, it will be also a very good handoff for you to tell us your opinion. Is the opportunity, is it possible to overcome all these challenges? Please, Alla, go ahead. Give us your opinion.
Thank you very much. I'm Alla Goldner. I am Director of Open Standards in NSC. I actually joined NSC only 4 months ago. Before that, I was also leading standardization and open source activities in MDocs. And so, you know, a few words I would like to say regarding NSC in 2 aspects. In the industry-related aspects of what we do as a company, and also in standardization and industry consortium related aspects. So, you know, for the first one, NSC has been deployed widely in RAN in Japan for many, many years, in the recent years, also for ORAN with massive MIMO use case. So NSC really gained its experience from, you know, Japan, high density areas. And that experience NSC decided would be good to apply to other areas. So basically take that opportunity of ORAN adoption in the different countries, and by leveraging actually our experience, bring it there. So this is how basically NSC came into ORAN area. And, you know, I would basically like to mention even, you know, some recent things that we did even since I joined. So NSC acquired Aspire technology company, which is the major provider of integration services in RAN, and that indeed extends our integrational, you know, services and abilities that we have, you know, following on what Timo has said previously. You know, before that, we launched CU/DU for international market, and that's also very important thing in terms of that, you know, ecosystem extension, which also previous speakers talked about. There are not that many vendors, and we've been RU vendor for international market, and we decided this is an opportunity for us also to extend it into CU/DU. Now, it is important, very important to mention that when I say, you know, was RU and CU/DU, it is not that we intend or we push for all of our products all together. It is really for ecosystem extension, for bringing more possibilities to the ecosystem and to potential integration with other parts coming from another vendors. And finally, third thing, you know, again, on the industry-related activities I wanted to mention, you know, in the beginning of the year, NSC acquired Blue Danube in the US, and we turned it into innovation hub. And this is one additional source of innovation and potential, you know, integration lab where we can interoperate and test this additional vendor. Now on standardization front, and here NSC has always been active in FreeGPP and in ORAN Alliance and in TIP, of course, and we've recently actually went through TIP process of getting badges for our products. So we got bronze badge for our 12 RUs. We were actually the first vendor who followed a new process, which was just announced by TIP back in October. So we indeed strongly believe in those, you know, industry-based activities. We believe that as many as those activities exist, either in our own labs or in labs by different vendors, or even better in the communities provided by TIP, by ORAN Alliance, additional thing, you know, and soon there is going to be Also, some press releases related to this coming from Oran Alliance, but basically we participate in Oran Alliance Plugfest right now in 3 different territories in Japan, in EU, in the US. More of those activities, better Oran adoption will be. Now, with all that said, the picture is not that bright, right? So I would say, speaking about challenges that we face, I would say there are several that I would like to mention. First of all, the integration challenge, and I guess I've already touched that. Again, as many integration efforts in the industry as we see, the better for Oran adoption is. Now, the second thing is, and I think it is very important and rarely being discussed, consolidation of requirements, because there are many options provided by Oran specifications. And indeed, those are not standards as per se, but those are specifications which can be implemented by them. But then, different service providers request for different configuration options, and then basically we, as a vendor, need to provide a different set of configuration per each customer. And that basically means we cannot provide something on high scale, and we cannot be cost effective because of that. And that really hurts Oran market in overall, I think. So that consolidation, that consolidated set of the requirements, perhaps an offsite work by service provider to agree on a less configuration, on a less requirement set, but deploy that set of requirements in the reality. This is what probably is needed by the industry. And one last thing I would like to mention, integration, and it's very important, but orchestration and management is not less important. And the reason I'm saying that is that the more components in the network exist, the more end-to-end management and orchestration is needed. And with Oran, instead of having one box, we have RU, CU, DU, which might and will be provided hopefully by different vendors. And then that task of, managing all those functions, yes, it is an integration task, but also end-to-end management task. And this is why we are highly promoting SMO in Oran architecture with non-real-time read, and then also end-to-end SO, managing all the network functions in the chain of network, including RAN, transporter, core. Those things are very, very, very important for Oran adoption as well. So this is also, and standards do exist. They already, some standards by 4GPP, some standard specifications provided by ETSI are the same, some provided by ETSI and FV. So really it is up to industry now to go and adopt those. And again, we see this as a very important, and we really call for wider adoption of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those points. I took a few notes because already I start to see commonalities, and we will return to the next round of our question, make it a little bit more tangible, our suggestions. So, Francesca, welcome. We're very excited to have somebody from the United Kingdom with us today, especially from the DCMS. We see a lot of great activities that you're doing at the government, but also at the private sector level. I personally feel that we have a lot to learn from you. So please, let us know a little bit of the main key activities that you're doing and why you're doing them.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to join the panel today. It is great to be able to share the UK's experience. I think we have learned quite a lot in our journey so far, and it's been really helpful over the course of this week speaking to other nations and other companies about what they're doing. From the UK's point of view, this journey really began about 3 years ago with a review that we published that highlighted the risks of the status quo. And on the back of that, 2 years ago, we launched a strategy to look at what we can do to build a more diverse, a more resilient, and a more secure telecoms supply chain infrastructure. That was, fortunately, backed up with a huge amount of money from the government, and we're very lucky to have £250 million to work on this with. And I can go into a bit more detail on what we've been doing with that funds. I think what's been really clear from the UK experience is that this is not This is not just a government-led initiative. From a government's perspective, we can really see the risks of the status quo and the opportunities that open and interoperable architectures present. But it's been very much a conversation and working with industry who've clearly signaled that this is the way that they want to be moving. If I was to talk about the kind of role of government in this, I think everyone automatically thinks of government and your mind goes to regulation. And it's not just about that. I think it might be easiest to see it in sort of three broad buckets of what the government's role is in supporting these technologies. One, and this is crucial, is to protect the critical national infrastructures. And it's absolutely clear that security and resilience is at the heart of this. We're not naive about the risks of Open RAN, and there is, as we've been saying, a lot to do on standards in particular. But governments need to be involved in that debate and supporting companies through industry-led standard setting in order to build Open RAN infrastructures or open interoperable infrastructures that do deliver on security as well as on performance and commercially as well. So as well as protecting, I think there's another very important role for governments in convening and talking to industry, bringing together industry at a national level and an international level, but also bringing together other governments. We have had a very interesting week so far here in Riga, bringing together regional governments and talking about the shared challenges and the shared opportunities that we face. But also from a UK perspective, we've been doing a huge amount to engage with industry domestically through an advisory council that gives us the expert view on what to do. I mean, we're policymakers, we're not technical experts. We need that conversation to be working. We need that to be an open door of conversation between. And for us, as a foundation of our policy on diversification, that really strong relationship with industry has been absolutely crucial. So there's protecting, there's convening, but I think what might be most useful to go into is what I see as the kind of third part of this, and that is what can governments do to enable this. This is not a government-led effort. It's where industry is going, it's where industry wants to go, it's where there is huge amounts of opportunities for business and for consumers. And the UK has been thinking for 2 years, 3 years now, on what we can do to help industry along that journey. And there's a few different roles for government in that. One really important thing is simply signalling, showing the direction of travel that we want to see. As part of that, we announced a year ago, I think, that we would want to see 35% of the UK's mobile network traffic carried over open and interoperable systems by the year 2035. Now, to a lot of people, that seems really ambitious. Well, it wouldn't be an ambition if it wasn't ambitious. And actually, we have seen already huge movements towards that. Vodafone, for example, has announced that it will be launching 2,500 Open RAN sites, working with NEC as well across the UK, and those sites are already going live. Also, in terms of signalling the direction that we want to see the industry going, this year we announced the Open RAN principles. We have all these conversations about Open RAN, and I sometimes wonder if two people in the room have the same idea of what we're talking about, because there's a huge amount of discussion about the different technologies involved, and there's many different ways that that technology could go. And we need to have a really clear shared vision of what good Open RAN looks like. And that's why we announced the principles earlier this year of what Open RAN should look like. So open disaggregation, standards-based compliance, demonstrated interoperability and implementation neutrality are for us the 4 pillars that we really need to see for Open RAN to succeed. But it's not just about signaling. In order to kind of enable the full potential of Open RAN, we're also looking at what we can do to remove barriers, whether that is sunsetting 2G and 3G networks so that you are freeing up spectrum, or looking at other barriers that are preventing the direction of travel we want to see. Standards have been mentioned a few times. What can we do to get more small and medium industry involved in standard setting with the skills they need to do that, for example? And finally, there is the role of government in helping R&D and really throwing concrete money at sorting out the problems that we see, whether that is interoperability, that's been raised a few times, or other challenges that we see around Open RAN. So the UK has launched a number of different R&D initiatives, some of which are focused on interoperability, like Sonic Labs or the UK Telecoms Lab, as well as what we call Frank, which is a competition we launched benefiting 15 different consortia with £36 million worth of investment. That we've got a whole spectrum of different R&D initiatives that we are now launching out to help try to build that ecosystem, to build that innovation, to build that creativity. I think perhaps the kind of note I'd want to end on is that this is not just about governments working in isolation. It really has to be about governments working with industry and working with each other. We're seeing great things happening elsewhere in the world, in Japan, in the US. We had a tour yesterday of a lab right here around the corner in Riga doing really exciting things. And governments have a role to play in helping that ecosystem speak to each other and to listen to industry and understand what industry wants. And so that's why events like this are so important. And thank you for bringing us together today.
Thanks a lot. And it's actually so wonderful to hear all these things from you and on the enthusiasm and direction that you're giving to your own industry, but to the whole world. We have experience with the European countries. Some of them are enthusiastic, other ones don't put that kind of effort. And we will make sure that we point out to this session and to listen to your guidelines, that what should European countries do with respect to their attention to this important direction that I think is inevitable. We have less time than I was hoping, but let's talk about the future, maybe in a more concise way and in a more actionable way. Let's try to avoid being a little bit too politically correct. I've heard common signals, like, what do we do, for example, with, like this, the move from kind of like standards to requirements. I think almost all of you mentioned this point. What needs to be done? What would make really a difference? Let's be as precise as possible. Richard.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of the biggest challenges, and I think Timo also pointed out that the point with there's still things to be added to the standards to make them more complete, but at the same time, there's a huge amount of optionality. And if a vendor's going to get scale on a solution, they need to make sure they're building things with the right options that will satisfy their wider customer base. And certainly what we've done within TIP is try to get agreement among operators on what the requirements are. So going down to the use case level and saying, well, actually, we don't need any of these features if we're not talking about massive MIMO. If we are talking about massive MIMO, we need all these features, and trying to make it clear where these options are useful and where they don't need to be considered. And so these refined and narrower sets of requirements are very useful when it comes to actually building a definition of what a product needs to look like. So I think that's going well. I don't think we need to change what we're doing. I think we just need to make sure that as we add new use cases, we're focusing on the ones that have the big markets. So sometimes you do tend to find that you go down a rabbit hole, you start talking about one very useful scenario, and then you talk about what's of interest to just one operator rather than the wider operator base. So I think that's all we have to do, just keep making sure that we engage publicly with these discussions and it doesn't become private consortia and you end up with sort of sub-ecosystems in each region, and we're not getting anything that can be deployed globally. So I think we just need to make sure we're not trying to make claims about Open RAN being a success. As I said before, we don't want to say Open RAN is a success now. It's on the right path to being a success, and we just have to be realistic that this is going to take time, and we have to prove things one step at a time. So, for macros, I think that's the big market for us. We're talking about probably 5 years before there's a realistic chance that we could be putting macros into any premium macro locations, because
But how do we
we've already just
accelerate
rolled out
it?
5G.
You know, I mean, I get it, but lots of complexity, lots of. I heard, you know, Ala before. Her point is like there's so many combinations. Like Timo, what do you think? How do we reduce
So
faster the requirements, the combinations, and make it like an easier field to play? You know.
So this is a really, really big question to answer. We would need a couple of days.
That's right.
Yeah, but I'll take one example. You know, Richard touched this point that there is too much optionality in specs.
Yes.
So,
but let's also watch the clock and
yeah.
give a fair
So
opportunity for everyone.
one topic which we are working, which is kind of amazing for many people, why cloud platform provider is developing precision timing for RAN. But that's RAN Alliance's decision that the cloud platform has to do that, so we need to do precision timing, Sync E. Now, RAN Alliance have 4 timing profiles. 4 sounds like a good number, but each of these profiles, they have like half a dozen sub-configurations.
Okay.
And that's way too much. And I would say 80% of those are waste of time and waste of people's time to specify them. And we are never going to implement everything, I can say it here in public. And if we reduce timing profiles, or if ORAN Alliance reduces timing profiles to a manageable number of profiles, that would accelerate timing.
Thanks. I mean, thanks a lot for that. Ala, what do you think? Because you mentioned the same point. What would make it happen? It looks like a little bit like engineers gone wild. I've been in that position, like when you have an open playing field and then everybody has their opinion. How do we get it more contained? What do you think?
I really think it is up to industry collaboration, and I have a very big hopes for TIP efforts in this regard, because, you know, TIP is about taking the requirements from all different sources, such as 3GPP, ORAN Alliance, and even other specification, and consolidated per service provider requirements. And hopefully, you know, right now they're really gathering all of the requirements. And again, in order to get batch, for example, we need to pass through all of the requirements. My hope is that there will be, as I said earlier, agreed sets of service providers requirements, probably following their own agreements and memorandum of understanding. By the way, recently, you know, Entity Docomo and Vodafone has signed such as memorandum of understanding related to ORAN, both to ORAN testing and to RIC use cases. So I really hope that will be real thing and most service provider will join. So eventually we see that consolidated set of less requirements which are practical and pragmatically can be implemented. I think this is really the way forward, right? You know, specification always, you know, even in 3GPP, one of the speakers mentioned before, all in 3GPP has to be implemented. I would not agree with that because, you know, 3GPP also had probably 10-15% of mandatory requirements, and then the rest are optional as well. So I'm not afraid of the fact that there are too many specifications and too many configurations in the specification as is. I'm concerned that different configurations are being requested. So such an efforts by TIP, by perhaps additional consortiums of actually consolidated the most important ones, will help ORAN to become adopt on scale, and this is really what we are looking forward for, and this is really what we are participating in.
Thanks a lot for that, and don't worry too much about the time because we're going to steal a little bit from the Q&A. So let's be fair. But I want to get to that point because it could become a nightmare for somebody who's trying to scale. So Francesca, on this point of like, you know, making, you know, less combinations, less configurations, and more kind of like a more precise set of requirements that can be applied. Are you guys doing anything in that domain that is assisting the industry?
So I think this is where this work that we've been doing on trying to build a shared vision of what we want Open RAN to look like is so important. So these Open RAN principles that we published earlier this year are really trying to do that and set out clear guidelines for where we think this needs to go.
Okay.
What's really important, though, I think, is not only just building that shared vision, but then working together on how we deliver it. We've seen some great step forwards with governments over the last year, with the Prague proposals that were signed off this time last year. But there's a lot more that we can be doing to work together to pool our R&D resources and to work together with industry. I mean, the UK, we're only 2% of the global market. We're nothing without working together. So that's really important that we're actually doing concrete deliverable actions together.
Okay, wonderful. I mean, thank you very much. Christian, what's your opinion? Because I think you probably like many configurations to test them, but
Well, from a test point of view, Oran is quite a good story. But I would say all these configurations and Oran alliances and standardization, it's necessary. But I would really, or at least what we see at the moment, is the momentum what's coming from the verticals. So from the enterprise business, from the industrialization. And I'm in contact with a lot of universities which are doing research on Open RAN. And I think this way of research will bring the ORAN story a little bit, or will push the ORAN story. And I would say, when we talk about logistics, talk about harbors, autonomous driving, production environment, and so on, this will help us to bring the idea of ORAN forward. And I would not maybe look for the big goal, replacing now infrastructure from a certain area. I would really push and do end-to-end testing, service level testing, quality assurance measurements. So in this way, spend some time for developing methodologies. That's where we are in, and that's what we are doing today in terms of deployment, troubleshooting, performance tuning, quality service testing, and so on.
thanks
So
for that.
it's a good future. We are on a good way.
I think we all agree on that it's a good future. It's challenging and interesting. Let's see if there are questions from our audience. Please, sir.
My name is John Strand from Strand Consult. We've done a lot of reports describing the myths around Open RAN. And I hear this story about vendor diversity. Isn't it, two questions, isn't Open RAN too little too late? Because we can see the operators basically don't buy Open RAN, okay? It's a commercial disaster, to be honest. Vodafone have correctly said they would deploy 2,000 sites in UK this year. I think they have something like 15 or 20 up running, and it's very close to the end of the year. We hear all the time the vendor diversity. This is in the RAN part, and we have like 5 vendors in the RAN part. And you can just remove the 2 Chinese and say we have 3 just to the RAN. But the RAN represent less than 3% of the operator's ARPU. So, you know, the whole story about this is high cost. How do you look at the vendor diversity in other parts of the value chain? In the Open RAN, you use the Intel chipset. There's, according to my knowledge, 1 vendor. If we look at the hyperscale clouds, we have 3 vendors, 3 American vendors, Microsoft, AWS, and Google. If I look at the operating systems, we have 2 operating systems, iOS and Android. And I could keep on saying like that. There's actually more vendor diversity in the RAN part of the mobile industry than in other parts
I
of
think
it.
the point is clear, and I love questions that are actually statements, but okay, let's take it from there. So anyone wants to take it head on? Timo, you go.
I will answer the first part. Is it too, what was it, too little?
Too little, too late. I like that. Too,
I think it's too little, too early. And why I'm saying it is that, what? So,
yes.
so this has been going on for quite a few years, and we still do not have large-scale serious deployments. We don't. And we are approaching the time when industry starts doing POCs and trials on 6G.
Yes.
And I believe firmly that ORAN Alliance compliant RAN, disaggregated RAN, will be a big thing on 6G. Hopefully earlier a bit, but...
So it's giving direction to the future, but let's go to our operator here, who can tell us, please, honestly and frankly, why it's not being adopted by operators and not what needs to happen?
Well, certainly it's a good point about the timing. With 5G, most operators have rolled out 5G already, so saying Open RAN is now ready to deploy isn't that exciting for us because we've already rolled out 5G. So the opportunity then comes when that 5G equipment that's been rolled out already is at the end of its lifetime. So that's why for the big prize, perhaps, of the macro network, you really are looking at least 5, 7, 10 years down the line. And that is when we're starting to talk about 6G. So it's a very good point that the Open RAN architecture becomes a wide-scale success when we get to 6G. But one of the key things about 6G is that it's not that we want to make sure that it isn't about rebuilding the network. So this idea of a disaggregated, virtualized architecture is so that as we move from what's classed as 5G to what's classed as 6G, we're not going to have to rebuild the network. There will be obviously modifications and additions and things removed gradually over time, but we're not going to say on this date we switch on all these new capabilities. 6G is going to be a lot more of a gradual progression. But to enable all of those 6G capabilities, we do need this sort of architecture.
Thanks for that. Anyone else feels passionately about that question? Ala, I see you probably.
Yeah. So first of all, briefly on the first point, I don't agree it's a disaster, it is too late at all, because, ORAN so not officially being part of 5GSA, but strongly associated with 5GSA, both from deployment perspective and from standardization perspective. And we all know, of course, status of deployment of 5GSA. And, I would even say that 5GSA a little bit precedes ORAN. So I really think that perhaps there was some, high expectation than there should be. But even, if you look into analysis papers from a few years ago, no one has said that ORAN would reach a wide deployment status by 2022. So I don't think that this is the case. It is progressing perhaps a little bit lower than expected or lower than expected, but not, not to the extent of has been a disaster, not at all. Now, regarding vendors, I would actually agree to that point. Indeed, there are not many vendors in that field, but actually, as you say, more than in other parts of the network. But of course, we would expect and we would like to have more. But one point here I would like to mention, I don't see, split of CU, RU and the vendors in that space necessarily as that significant innovation. I do see innovation actually coming from vendors providing, those near real-time, non-real-time applications, which can now by standardized means communicate with radio, with parts of the radio and provide and information from outside, basically feed up radio with that set of information. And this is really what I would expect a new company to come up with and to bring and to build those applications, based on statistics, based on AI ML, for different types of the use cases, both on optimization front and on the front of, splicing management and so on. And at this point of time, I think even when industry talk about those applications, it is more really, into the optimization field. And this is why perhaps it is more up to those, RAN vendors to provide. But as we move forward, this is really going to cover more, vertical related use cases, industry related use cases. And this is where I really expect those startups to evolve and to actually get into ORAN area. And, this will extend our ecosystem. So that would be my response.
Thanks a lot. We have a flashing red light on the screen. I think we started a discussion to be continued. Please use the platform, ask more questions, debate. This is an ongoing process, and definitely thanks to our panelists and to the audience and online for attending this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marius and panel.